Everyone, Dwayne here with Bronco Wild Outdoors. Today I'm talking to 2.7 Ecoboost Nano V6 twin turbo. Now, if you've never heard the word nano mixed in with that, there is a reason. That was a engine name or a build name that Ford gave this engine. Let's start at the beginning. This is Gen 2, second generation of the 2.7. So a lot of times when you talk to people about the 2.7, they'll say, yeah, well, I knew someone that had one. They'll tell you the story. You have to go back to the beginning. The first generation was introduced in 2015 into the F-150. That was a direct injection engine with a lot of similarities and a lot of differences as well. So the Gen 2, which came out in 2018, has a lot of improvements. So we're going to start at the bottom end of the engine and kind of work our way up. So first of all, this, like I said, it's a 2.7 Nano V6 twin turbo. This engine it's a two-piece cylinder block. So part of it is made out of a material called CGI, which is compacted graphite iron. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you, maybe Power Stroke 6.7 diesel does. So that is the same material that Ford builds the Power Stroke 6.7 out of, and at about 1,000 feet-pounds of torque, that engine goes through a lot of stress. If it's good enough for that, it's good enough for this Bronco. And the second part of the block, which starts around the main bearing caps and kind of goes down where the oil pan bolts to, is made out of aluminum. And speaking of bearing caps, this block has something called cracked main bearing caps. Now there's a process for this fracturing, but to sum it up, if you took something and broke it in half, right, and it had jagged edges, and you put it back together and you almost couldn't see the line or the seam where it broke, that is equivalent to what these main bearing caps do. So main bearing caps have a tendency to, they're under a lot of stress, right? And a typical main bearing cap would be cut off the casting of the block, machined, and reattached with bolts. And that holds the bearing, both part of the bearing in the block and part in the cap. This is what holds the crankshaft in the engine, allows it to spin around. So there has been some stress points, high RPMs, high torque ranges, and uneven bearing wear. So anytime you have a machine fitting, it is what it is. Cracked main bearing caps allows all the jagged edges works as support. So it's not easy to move left or right or back and forth. Very little flex at high RPMs. You still have two bolts that hold it into place, but it's a lot better system. So that's in the bottom end of the engine. Now stay to the end of the video and we'll talk about the notorious oil pump that seems to have some people up in arms on social media on some of the Bronco forums. So I just want to address that today. As we work our way up, this second generation has a dual timing chain. Now this is variable cam driven, so we have double overhead cams, so we have two cam shafts per cylinder head, and we have cam phasers on the end of the cam. That enables Ford to tune the timing of the cam, the valves opening, in relation to RPMs, torque specs, eco mode, different modes, right? The engine now is able to fine tune itself to when those intake valves open or close in relation to the cylinder being on top dead center. Now that's a really cool thing, because now Ford's been able to fine tune the horsepower and the torque all the way down to fuel economy. So we have a small engine, a small displacement engine. It's 2.7 liter, which is, don't remember the cubic inches, but somewhere around 150, I think 132, 150. But it enables the fuel efficiency as well as the power, so it's pretty cool. Now, for a long time, picture a chain going over the cam on the left-hand side, over the cam on the right, and back down. So it looks kind of like that. Kind of looks like the logo on the side, the Badlands logo. All right, so you had cam tensioners, or timing chain tensioners, one on the passenger side, kind of pushing in on the chain as the chain stretched. It would keep tension on it to help keep the cams in time. Well, Ford has actually added one on the other side as well. And why does that matter? Well, some of the little clicking noise that you may have gotten in some of the older overhead cam engines could have been because there wasn't a tensioner on the other side, and so you were tensioning up the cam, the timing chain on the left-hand side, and sort of let it flop on the other. So now they've added tensioners on both sides, thus getting rid of that flop and that movement. The cam phasers are really cool because, like I said, we can tune those cams to exactly what we need. The cylinder head design is really cool because now what's happened, Ford has cast the exhaust manifold into the cylinder head. Now there's two major things that this does to help, that this actually helps the engine with. First of all, on cold starts, when you crank the engine up, it's at ambient temperature, right? Whatever the temperature is in the garage or outside. So we want this engine to come up to temperature as fast as possible to minimize wear and tear. That's when a lot of the bad stuff happens to an engine. So we also want to keep the exhaust temperature from getting too high, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what this system does now with the cast in the head exhaust manifolds, there's water jackets around that. So as the engine starts to heat up, the exhaust is heating up the water, okay? So as the exhaust is heating up the water in the engine, that helps to bring the operating temperature up, thus giving you heat in the cabin quicker, and also adding heat into the engine, minimizing that wear and tear. The other thing it does is it caps the temperature of the exhaust manifold. It kind of keeps it below. So we have a minimum and a maximum. We're kind of keeping it below that max. Now, why does that matter? That matters because now Ford's been able to attach the turbos directly to the cylinder head. The closer the turbo is to the cylinder itself, or the cylinders itself, the less turbo lag you have. So when the turbos are sitting over here and there's piping that goes down to it, it takes a little bit longer for that hour to hit the wheels. So this is a lot better. Also, this is the first generation that they're electronically control wastegates on the turbos. Now, a side note, this is more probably a preference. I don't know if it's a bulletin or not yet. But if you have a mall crawler, not knocking on it, but if you're just driving it to the grocery store back and forth to work and you're never really doing performance related activities with it, stepping your foot in it, and you never have to, you want to make sure you exercise the engine. You want to get some boost going because you want to make sure that the wastegates are operating. You don't want them to become dormant and then they're no longer mobile, right? It sticks open, sticks closed, whatever the case is. So you definitely want to make sure that you're exercising that wastegate. And you do that by building boost in the engine. Now, the cylinder heads, there's been a couple of issues with, you've seen 2.7s that had engine problems. I think when you look at the macro, you look at how many 2.7s are built and how many don't have problems, I don't think that's a scary thing yet. If you see, 10 a week, maybe it becomes something. What I've seen is it looks like drop valves. Well, hopefully it's not a timing thing. If it's a valve keeper or a retainer on a valve spring, it is what it is. That does unfortunately happen, but I don't know if the numbers are big enough. Obviously Ford's on top of that. But the 2.7, the reason why I went with it is for the torque range. And I really like the engine, Look, I came from the V8 days. I built a lot of engines in my time, and I like big V8s. But I have to tell you, when it comes down to the V6, this right here has more horsepower than, say, a 90s 5-liter, a 302, say, in the Fox Body Mustang. So we're making over 100 more horsepower here and getting a lot better fuel economy. So now it's cool to have that V8. Don't get me wrong. If I have a choice, I'm a V8 guy. But my real close second is this 2.7. I'm very happy with it. So when we get back into the engine itself, now there's a few things. We definitely want to make sure that the oil, you follow manufacturer's recommendations for the oil. You want to use the high quality oil and the OEM style or a spec oil filter. Cheap oil changes are cheap oil changes. The oil in this engine will either make or break its life, and that is no joke. Now, we're going to back up a little bit. You've heard of carbon buildup with direct injected engines. This engine right here has something that a few companies have now, but the industry, I think, is going to move that way, and it's called dual injection. So the 2.7, when it came out first generation, 2015, had direct injection. That's where the injector is actually spraying gas into the cylinder. Now this is more efficient, and this enables them to get the exact amount of gas into that cylinder. It helps with atomization, so they're getting the right spray at the right angle with the right amount of air and the right amount of combustion. Efficient as possible for both performance and fuel economy. The problem with that is, and especially on a boosted engine, when you have turbos, that in this particular engine, by the way, the compression ratio is 10.3 to 1. Now, that's already kind of up there with a modern day engine, you know, compared to some. But when you have boost being created by the turbos, you're building a lot of extra pressure in that cylinder. You have something called blow-by, and that's where some of the pressure goes around the piston by the rings and into the crankcase. So this will be down into the crankcase itself. Now, where does that go? That has to go somewhere. Because of emissions, it has to be put back into the intake, and that happens through a series of vents, PCV valves, and basically that'll take that vapor, that oil vapor, just picture if you saw smoke, right? And that would pump it back into the intake. Now, why does that matter? Well, now we have air and we have an oily substance, a carbon now that is being introduced back into the cylinder. Well, remember, direct injection puts fuel directly in the cylinder, not in the intake itself. For years, you've relied on the fuel to help keep the intake valve cooler and to also wash off the carbon buildup. So the fuel's hitting it and kind of taking the carbon off and into the cylinder and then spent through the exhaust pipe. Well, with direct injection, you don't have that luxury, so carbon starts to build up on the intake valve or valves. That'll cause several things. That'll cause inefficient atomization. That'll cause low performance because you can actually lose compression. The valve's not seating in the cylinder head as well as it should because the carbon starts to build up on the valve seats. So you lose a little bit of compression there. It also changes how easy the air flows into the cylinder, which goes back to the atomization part. You need the right amount of air moving at the right speed in the right flow. You don't want too much turbulence, and maybe there's a way that air flows into a cylinder to make it efficient. That's why things were ported and opened up, and so there's several different ways to get air into a cylinder, but carbon buildup is your enemy. So with dual injection, they've actually added fuel back into the intake. So as the air's coming in with that oil vapor mixed in with it from the crankcase, you have oil spraying into the cylinder onto the intake valve, which actually drops the temperature of the valve, which keeps that from baking and caking up on the intake valve is the carbon itself. But also the fuel helps to wash off that intake valve. So not saying it will never carbon up, but it's just gonna, or build carbon, it's just gonna take a little bit longer, maybe a lot longer to do that. So dual injection has been found to be efficient and proficient in keeping the corrosion to a minimum into the cylinders, right? And that's really a big deal. So now getting to one of the last things, the oil pump. So there's something called parasitic loss. Parasitic loss is basically a drag on an engine. Now this goes all the way through to the tires, right? Transmission, differentials, U-joints, rear end gears. But right now we're concentrating on just the engine itself. So that is piston rings, bearings, gears and chains, and oil. So the viscosity of the oil matters when it comes to parasitic losses. So drag, let's just say drag. What Ford I think has done here they've added the variable capacity oil pump, and it's belt driven. Now they didn't just find a belt somewhere and decide to use it in oil. This has been a belt designed to use in a crankcase with oil and the temperatures, the environment for it. So that variable speed oil pump now changes the flow of oil into the engine. Now that scares me as an ex-engine builder, I guess, and the fact that I guess tuning electronically determines the flow on the oil pump. I don't know how low that pressure goes. I've seen some reports in articles as low as 20 psi. I can't verify that, I don't know, but 20 to me is very, very scary. Depends on the engine, depends on the weight, the viscosity, oil, and things like that. Typically engines are 55 to 65 cold. As the engine temperature goes up, that pressure can drop a little bit. 5W30. So Ford has figured with the viscosity of this oil, with the variable capacity pump, which they figured exactly what this engine needs and for wear and tear, that you have less drag from the belt. You also are pumping less oil when not needed, so that helps to cut back on drag. Remember, efficiency, what they're making these small engines do in horsepower, torque, and fuel efficiency, it's a game of quarter inches, right? So every little bit of improvement that Ford can make in this engine is going to add up to something that's measurable. And so variable capacity oil pump, pumping less oil, full synthetic is the way to go. Oh, by the way, typically spark plugs, plug wires, coils last 100,000 miles, 150,000 miles in vehicles now. In a boosted engine, you can probably expect 35 to maybe 60,000, depends on your driving. I'm estimating about 50,000 miles. I'll be changing the ignition on this, the plugs and wires and maybe coils, because its turbos are very hard on it. So kind of wrap this up a little bit, familiarizing you with the 2.7 and letting you know that the second generation is a really cool engine and there's a lot of good stuff. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, the double timing chain is one of the biggest wins I think they could have made in variable cam timing as well. But getting back to longevity and keeping it as running as good as possible. High quality oil, factory specs, really good gas. I mean, high quality gas that has additives that helps the engine. Now, there again, you have to refer back to the manufacturer specifications, make sure that you don't use a gas that's not approved, but stay away from the cheap stuff as well. You want to go with a premium gas. And back to the oil. Now, one thing I want to mention, going with getting a cheap oil change somewhere might be a little on the scary side. The oil filter is located right here. You probably can't see it from this angle, but it is a canister. It's a cartridge type filter. So when you unscrew this oil canister, this composite canister here, there is a cartridge filter in there. Now, when you unscrew this, if you're draining the oil and all the oil seems to be out of the pan and you unscrew this cap here, you're going to see additional oil go into the pan. And that's because they're in this inverted position that oil is trapped in the oil cartridge here in the filter. When you open it up, you allow that oil to drain into a bypass hole, which then takes it back out of the pan. Well, think about this. If your new oil filter, the cheap one that you get somewhere, is not the right diameter or length, it's not sealing inside this canister properly, and that can cause oil to leak by, which is unfiltered oil, potentially unfiltered oil, and potentially a loss of oil pressure. Because now it's not going through the normal pumping cycle, it's going bypassing itself. You also don't want to use a cheap filter that comes apart, collapses, maybe particles break off, but mainly the paper filters the cheap ones will collapse. So you want to make sure that you use a spec oil filter for this. It is critical. Gas and oil. Now, the only thing I'm going to do that's different than the recommendations in the owner's manual is I'm not going to wait till 10,000 miles or 1 year to change the oil. I'm going to do it more for that flexibility that they give you for usage, and I'm going to change the oil probably about every 3,000 to 4,000 miles. So that's just a preference. When I do the first oil change, it'll be a little bit less than that. Obviously, somewhere around 1,500. I'm 800 miles on this, and that is it. Trust me, we haven't driven it that far. So the 2.7, we do have a video coming out with the 2.3. We'll kind of cover some of the basics there. But in the 2.7, wrapping it up, we have a two-piece block made out of very strong material. We have double overhead cams, 2 timing change, dual injection, which is a real winner to help you against the carbon issue. We have great atomization, parasitic losses low as can be based on technology today. Variable capacity oil pump, yes, it's belt driven, and no, it shouldn't be a big deal. And understanding that the oil matters. It's not just oil in an engine, it actually matters, and boosted engines need a little bit more regular attention. And that's about it. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. You know, I think we'll move on through the transmission and differential next video. But the next engine video will be on the 2.3 because that's a very solid engine as well. But if you're debating on what to get, the Generation 2 Nano 2.7 EcoBoost Twin Turbo V6 is the way to go. Oh, almost forgot one thing. One important thing. 310 horsepower with 400 feet-pounds of torque. on regular gas, 87 octane, give or take. If you use a premium, you are at 330, looking at my notes, 330 horsepower at 415 pounds of torque. That's pretty good. So you can go from a 87 octane to a 93 octane, and those are nominal numbers, and that can give you a little bit more horsepower. Quality of gas matters, and depends on how you're driving it. If you're not driving it in off-road conditions and really stressing it out, if you're not towing anything, then I would say that the 87 is okay as long as it's a high quality fuel. And every once in a while, exercise the engine. Make sure everything stays lubed and moved. And hey, that's it. I hope you liked the video. If you have any comments, leave them below. Hit the bell icon so you know when we drop a video, go live. And I look forward to seeing or talking to you soon.